Now, the ICIS facilitates a variety of activities, including practice-focused webinars, informal coffee hours, academic panels, lightning talks. We have a regular newsletter issues, and we do a lot more. If you are interested in joining, you may do so first by joining TESOL International. You could also follow us on social media, as we often hold events that are open to all. For instance, this particular one, you do not have to be a TESOL member to be a part of this. If you have plans to attend TESOL 2025 in Long Beach, we would love to meet you in person. We have two opportunities. The first one is our open meeting, which will be on Wednesday, March 19th, starting at 10 to 11 a.m. The location is still to be determined. And then we also have the ICIS Networking Lounge, which will also happen on Wednesday from 4:30 to 5:30. In the expo area of the convention center. So if you do have plans, we'd love to see you. Okay. So today we have the pleasure of the editor and selected authors of two, not one, but two recently published books on intercultural communication and research in the Middle East and North Africa. We will first hear from Hamza, the editor, who is a research assistant professor in the Department of International Education at the Education University of Hong Kong. We will then hear 6 or 5 short presentations from selected authors. First, Dr. Afaf Rabehi is an ESL instructor at Lone Star College in Houston. Her research interests include intercultural language education and language learners' identity construction and development. Fajer bin Rashed holds a PhD in language and literacy education. She is an assistant professor at Australian University, Kuwait. Then we will hear from Mona Aljanahi, who holds a PhD in language and literacy education. She works at the College of Education in United Arab Emirates University. Next, we will hear from Reem AlQenai, who holds a PhD in applied linguistics, who is also an assistant professor and head of the Foundation Studies Department at Kuwait Technical College. Abdelhadi Fouad is a doctoral student in education in Ibn Totail University in Morocco. His research interests include critical pedagogy and curriculum evaluation. Next, we will hear from Lana Hiasat, who is a senior lecturer and senior fellow at HEA at Higher Colleges of Technology in Dubai. She is the winner of the Teaching Excellence Award in 2024. Her research interests are cultural and emotional intelligence, future foresight, and AI in higher education. We also have Christine Koum, who is an associate professor at Higher Colleges of Technology in Dubai, in the UAE. She's the president of TESOL International Association from 2020. Okay, I have these dates wrong. I have 2022 to 2012. So that's, but she was a president. She is also the recipient of James E. Lattis Award in 2018. Her research interests include testing, assessment, leadership, and management in ELT, research methods, teacher effectiveness, and classrooms of tomorrow. And next, we have Dr. Melanie van de Hoven, who is an independent researcher based in Abu Dhabi and Chamonix, France. Her research interests include intercultural communication, linguistic landscapes, and English medium instruction. Sarah Hopkins is an assistant professor at the University of St. Andrews in the UK. Her research interests include language and identity, linguistic ethnography, and English medium instruction. So we have plenty of wonderful speakers. And in order for this webinar to go smoothly and allow for all the speakers to present, I will be the timekeeper for each of the presenters. And Susan is going to be in charge of advancing the slides. At the end of these presentations, we will have some time for Q&A. I encourage you to write your questions in the chat or hold on to them until after the authors speak. So now I yield the floor to Dr. Hamza Rabu, and let's begin.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank the organizers first for the opportunity to virtually launch, these books and discuss them. And also would like to thank all the contributors for agreeing to be part of these books, because I think they are a great initiative to showcase the other perspective that do not tend to be very dominant in the scholarship and the literature of intercultural communication, right? So initially, the idea was to have only one book, actually. So I was inviting a lot of people that I know, and I know that they have been working on interculturality. Well, not specific on interculturality, but some aspect of it. So some of the contributors have worked on language or education. So, but they kindly agreed to be part of these books. Then I realized that there are quite a great number of abstracts. Then I will decide that I will do two different books. So yeah, that was great. That was great. A result that I was happy to have. Next. So this is the first book, right? It's titled Intercultural Communication, Education, and Research in the Middle East and North Africa. Well, one of the things I need to mention that I did not define exactly what I mean by intercultural communication in either of these books, because I know the very word of intercultural could have a lot of meanings, and these meanings could or principally differ depending on who is using them and where and how and why and for what purposes. So this is the first book I tried to kind of like compile the chapters that focus on research more than pedagogy. So this is the first book I have here, 11 chapters in addition to the introduction, in which I provide some of ideas, why I'm doing this book, why I invite people to do this, and then I provide very brief summaries of the main ideas of each chapter. Next. Well, the second book is Teaching and Research in Interculturality in the Middle East and North Africa. You'll see here that I'm using different terminology, especially for interculturality, because I know a lot of concepts are used in the literature. Some people use transcultural, some people use multicultural, which is more common, I would say, in the US. Interculturality now is more common. So yeah, this book, well, similar in the numbers of the chapters, 11 chapters, but all of them are about pedagogy and teaching practices, either investigating teachers' views, perspective, and how they impact, how they come to make sense of interculturality and how accordingly exercised within their classroom. Both books are diverse in terms of perspective, in terms of the theories used, as well as the methodologies used. So, as much as all of them talk about intercultural communication, each chapter is independent in itself in terms of its orientation, analysis, as well as the findings and the applications for both theory and praxis. Both books have representation from 7 countries, which is great. I was hoping to have more, but 7 is great. So, yeah, next. Um, Sure. I think there's another slide, but all right. The slide about the rationale. All right. Yes.
Uh,
So,
uh,
this yes. I want to discuss here the rationale for the books, actually, what I'm doing these books. Right. Well, first, this very attempt to do this stems from my own belief that the field of intercultural communication itself would cannot be really described accurately as being very intercultural. So because I'm heavily invested in the colonial scholarship and perspective in intercultural communication, so I was keen of doing this, right? And I thought that actually the MENA region is one of the most, I'll say, culturally diverse places. As much as it's culturally diverse, the very intercultural dynamics within the regions are fundamentally different from those that could be found in Europe or the Anglosphere or Asia. So that's the very important. The very fact that we will work in the MENA region, that would essentially push us toward theorizing and doing interculturality differently because the conditions themselves are different as much as the lenses that we use to very much analyze how interculturality is taking place. So again, it is about decentering and decolonizing. The second thing is that theorizing the one interculturality otherwise is very much borrowed from decolonial studies and used a lot in the literature now. So for me, doing things differently is again conditioned and bound by looking elsewhere, looking in other contexts. Again, not much has been said about intercultural communication, education, and research in the MENA region. Again, this is an exception I make because I cannot assume, I cannot say that I have extensively researched all the literature because I only read the literature in English. So I think there will be literature in other languages, which I have not really read or discovered. But at least in the English speaker literature, not much has been said about it. Again, the need to emphasize the locality of knowledge, how we make sense of interculturality, what is about, what purposes it serve for us. That would need a separate book that talk about this. Again, there's a lot of interculturality taking place in the MENA region. This is a rationale that could be like the first rationale, which is about decolonizing and decentering. Next. I want to share this result. They are from one of my articles published in Journal of Multicultural Studies, in which I have analyzed the national affiliation of both the published authors in the 2021 volume in as you can see, five, I would say, most important journals in intercultural communication knowledge. And you would see that the Anglosphere is very much dominant and not much is coming from Asia, Latin America, and Africa. Well, when you think about Asia, because Middle East and North Africa, Middle East is more or less more in Asia, but North Africa is Africa itself. So here you can see that Asia and Africa, both of them, they do not have, I will say, a major representation in these journals, both as publishing authors and editorial boards. But again, if we only analyze, the number of publishing authors and the editorial board members from specifically from the MENA region, I think the analysis would communicate aggravated results because most of the research coming from Asia is more like China and Hong Kong, and again from Africa is a lot coming from South Africa. So even though we think about peripheries, the global south, there are varying degrees of subalternity within these contexts themselves. Next. All right, this is things to remember here. The first thing is I do not claim that the MENA region is I do not claim that it's homogeneous in any sense, right? There are diverse perspective, and also because I will speak my own country is Morocco. Morocco is quite different from how things are, for example, in the UAE or in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, right? But I'm using them more or less as a context that actually share a lot of things. I mean, in terms of language, the culture, history, there are some sort of common things among them, right? But by no means I say they are homogeneous and that we can have a generic, some sort of like a theory of interculturality that would even, very optimistically would encompass all the dynamics and complexities existent in the MENA region. So again, what is critical, useful, and important is always open to negotiation and interpretation. As much as I was hoping to push for decentering knowledge, all the authors they have their own understanding of interculturality, how we can move forward. So as you can see, as you read the whole books, they would not necessarily find one single consistent narrative. All the chapters are different in themselves and how they contribute to learn to knowledge. So the books do not argue that because a perspective is not dominant and from within the MENA is then original and derivative. Well, the very fact that a perspective is not dominant does not mean it's brilliant or original. But I'm just hoping that we need to show more these perspectives, specifically from the MENA region. Again, the books do not specify whether interculturality is a theory, method, phenomenon, or a practice. I do not specify that in the introduction, and it is up to readers to actually explore the chapters and find it for themselves what the authors, how they are making use of interculturality, and what do they mean by it. So I invite readers to get these books, and I recommend their libraries to get it and read it, and I'm sure they will find a lot of interest and perspective there. I think this is the last slide, right? Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, what's next? So publishing these books is not an end of itself. Again, I just want to summarize the whole thing here. It's more about knowledge circulation, conception, rather than the production per se. Yeah, it's very important that we publish. It's very important we have two books published, but it's not about publishing entirely, but more or less how that perspective within the books are drawn upon and used in other research. Publishing for the sake of publishing would not change much. It's more about conception and circulation of that knowledge. So again, more critical research is needed on how intercultural communication knowledge can account for local condition, needs, and aspiration. Again, dominant theories could be very helpful, but again, we should remind ourselves that our contexts are different. And as much as a theory could be brilliant, it does not necessarily mean that it will effectively capture the complexities within our context. I think more contextualization and more localization of knowledge is very, very important, especially now. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I give the floor to the next speaker.
Hello. I'm not sure if you can hear me. I'm
We
just
can hear
setting
you,
my
Afaf.
timer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hello from Houston, Texas. I would like to first thank Nicole and Leslie for putting this together, for organizing this, and Hamza, of course, for giving me and the other contributors this opportunity to share our, as he said, diverse perspectives on interculturality in the MENA region. My chapter, as you can see, is titled We Are Algerians, We Are Muslims, AFL Educators' Perceptions of Interculturality in the Algerian Context. When I received the email from Hamza, the very first time, I thought, yay, this is an opportunity for me to talk about my study. I was a fresh graduate, but as I started writing my chapter, I realized, you know what, there are other things that I would like to highlight, and I'm not going to talk about my PhD only, the findings only, just a part of it. And I would like to highlight my positionality as a Arab North African Muslim student, PhD student in the UK, how that has affected my study and how the post-PhD, my professional career, my other side has again affected how I look at my data. So the first one is about my PhD study. In the chapter, I only highlighted half of the findings. In the study, I looked at how culture and interculturality are highlighted, their status in the new curriculum of English in Algerian middle school. I would like to apologize for the lighting. It's the office, I'm at work. And I analyzed the textbooks then, and I have interviewed EFL educators, the authors of the textbooks, the teachers and inspectors. And I found that the results, the findings were fascinating. The main two findings I talk about in this chapter are about identity, national identity and religious identity. There was like a paradox of priorities when it comes to educators' perceptions. They want to build what they call national pride and belonging in their learners first, and then maybe explore the rest, the outside world. All of my participants highlighted the importance of being, open-minded, launching bridges to and with the world, but this comes next. After we make sure that they know they are Algerians, they are proud of being Algerians, and they know their religion, which is the second part of my finding, religious identity. For most of my participants, the religiously different other seems like a threat. Anything or anyone who is different, whose culture is different, for them it meant the religious is different. This is a threat, and our students are still young. These are middle school students or learners aged between 11 and 14, and we shouldn't yet expose them to other religions. So we'd rather focus on the Algerian culture and the Muslim identity first. And when they get old, they can do what they want. This is the first part. This is the first part of my chapter. The second is, what did I think of this? When I was doing my PhD, how did I perceive this? Like Hamza, I like to call it, I was trained in the West. And the first time I really grasped what interculturality and culture are was 2 years into my PhD. I've read all the literature in English. It did not occur to me to read in Arabic or French, for instance, just because I thought, do they really know what interculturality is? I don't really want to admit this, but this is the truth. This is what happened. And this has positioned me as a cultural outsider. When I was doing the interviews, when I was analyzing my interviews, I found my data very fascinating as an outsider, as someone who's not really Algerian at the time, but who's living in the UK, who's read everything there is about interculturality from a Eurocentric or from a global North perspective. And I remember during one of my interviews, the head author said at the end, "You are here to criticize us," which maybe I was not. I can't guarantee that. But I thought when I was writing this chapter that this positionality needs to be highlighted. The third and last part is about my professional growth, my identity as a researcher, as a lecturer post-PhD. This again has changed the way I looked at my data. When I started work and I taught a course called Culture and Interculturality in EFL, and I interacted with my students, that again had led me to go back to my thesis, to my data, and look at it from a different perspective. And I realized that I was really heavily influenced by the West or the Western perspective of culture and interculturality, that I looked at my data through that lens. This helped me change my perspective. And then when I tried to do more research, read further about it, I realized there isn't really much written about it. The few or so papers and works that are in English by Algerian researchers provide very different perspectives on interculturality. And some researchers even mix and correlate culture with the religion. This before I found to be fascinating in a little bit negative way, but now I understand that being Algerian, being Muslim, we say as Muslim that Islam is a way of life, and some define culture as a way of life. So this has put my participants and myself, and I believe other researchers, in an intricate position to differentiate and, if you may say, pull apart culture and religion. And I believe that's it.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Afaf.
Dr. Afaf. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, it sounds great. Thank you, Fajer.
Great, thank you so much. I'm Fajer bin Rashed. My co-authors and I are excited to present about promoting translanguaging in the ESL classroom. We're going to have a closer look into Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates throughout our brief presentation today. Next. The chapter essentially attempts to understand the teaching processes and interactions in TESOL classrooms from an intercultural communication lens, which contributed to unpacking the power relations residing within English language speakers. The ELT classroom, especially in the Arab world, is a site where Arab teachers' multilinguistic identities are constantly portrayed with an essentialist view, unfortunately. And it is where learners' native languages are perceived to interfere with learning the target language. Next, please. However, little is said about such Euro-Americano-centric practices within regional scholarship. An example of such practices is when ELTs allow the use of, don't allow the use of learners' first language, albeit strategic and minimal. And when they allow it, it inexorably implies erroneous notions about the linguistic membership, the teacher's linguistic membership to the English language community. Next, please. Guided by the Unequal English's theoretical framework, this chapter offers a blueprint for re-evaluating instructional practices that might result from employing such Euro-Americano-centric practices in education. It in turn explores ways through which translanguaging could support instructional decisions and practices in the education setting. Next, please. So the English language scene in Kuwait and in the UAE isn't too different. As in many GCC countries, the English language is pervasive. To this day, Kuwaiti Arabic, Kuwait's heritage language, remains influenced by the continuous mobility of English, and it continues to embed appropriated originally English words in it. And like its evasive nature in Kuwait, ascribing to an ESL or EFL designation to the English language experience in the UAE has proven difficult and is subject to debate up to today. Next, please. So rather than simplistically exploring the similarities and differences between cultures, in the chapter, we consciously highlighted the complex intersectionality between translanguaging and intercultural communication. We also highlighted their role in ultimately deconstructing, and in unsettling contemporary power structures between language speakers. Next, please. I now hand over the mic to Dr. Mona Aljanahi, who will take you through the rest of the presentation slides. Dr. Mona, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fajer. Hello, everyone. So let's start with the context of translanguaging in Kuwait first. So the national curriculum for English in Kuwait, which was introduced in 2014, actively included elements of intercultural education by including elements that support or promotes the idea of diversity, providing multicultural identities, and also allowing for the connection of languages. Now, interestingly, though, although teachers did include the L1 of students, particularly Arabic, in their classrooms, they did not hold favorable attitudes towards it. Towards the use of Arabic or L1 in the classroom. This was one significant finding that we had in our study. Next, please. The context in the United Arab Emirates was not too dissimilar from Kuwait, but we had a little bit of a difference in terms of the availability of policies. We did not find any official resources or materials that included any translanguaging policies with regards to the teaching of English, but anecdotal evidence from teachers that we were in contact with provided the notion that it was frowned upon to use any other language other than English in English classrooms, and teachers were encouraged to use English only in English classrooms and in science classes as well. In In reviewing the literature and in reviewing the research with regards to translanguaging education or translanguaging in the United Arab Emirates, generally stakeholders such as teachers and students were not in favor of translanguaging in classes. As you can see, we have included some very notable researchers who said that. Next, please. So in our chapter, we include suggested instructional practices. One particular activity is to connect students or support students to connect their native languages, their L1, with the language that they are learning. We give an example of Arabic and English. As you can see in the activity on the slide, the students are supported or encouraged to think of borrowed words in their native language from the language that they are learning, such as the case of Kuwait, in which the word office is derived, or the word hafiz in Arabic is derived or borrowed from the word office. So these kinds of activities can connect the languages that students are learning with the language that they speak at home. Of course, we understand that languages are very different. And so some languages might not have borrowed words. And so we ask instructors to use their discretion and to make it as contextually befitting the context in which they teach as possible. Next, please. So in our final analysis, we found that both Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates is not very different when it comes to reflecting a monolingual approach towards language education. We also found that there was a lack of explicit policies towards translanguaging in particular. And what happens is because there is a lack of explicit policies, there's also a gap in research. Sometimes, for example, such as the cases in Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates, we're not sure if the contradiction between what teachers' attitudes are and what their practices are is a result of policies not being there or policies not favoring translanguaging. In our chapter, we also call for instructors to adopt translanguaging, but with discretion and care, and with what suits the cultural context that they are in. Thank you very much.
Hello?
Hello, we could hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I hope my voice is clear.
Yes.
First, I'm honored to be with you. First, I'd like to thank my professor or my supervisor, Mr. Hiba Ibrahim. We co-authored this chapter together. And I'd like also to thank Professor Hamza for giving me the chance to write this chapter. Good. My chapter is on critical pedagogy, perspective on interculturality in Morocco TESOL textbooks. As you see here, I tried to make an interplay between critical pedagogy and interculturality, because we believe that both of them not only try to inquire oppression and master narratives and power dynamics, but they also try to dismantle them. Okay, to next, please. Good. So the overview of this chapter is we try to examine critically the intercultural representations in Moroccan TESOL textbooks from the perspective of critical pedagogy and to identify binaries of privilege and subordination systems and try to advocate for a contextually responsive approach to cultural inclusion, especially inclusion in Moroccan textbooks, EFL textbooks that align with Morocco's sociocultural conditions, needs, and aspirations. As you know, the Moroccan culture is very complex, and we cannot approach complex issues through the use of linear and simplistic approaches. That's why we try to include or incorporate critical pedagogy. Okay, the next one, please. Great. So the main objective that guides this book chapter is to challenge the superficial incorporation of interculturality in Moroccan TESOL textbooks and try to advance a critical pedagogy that integrates or interrogates or inquires power structures that resonate with Morocco's diverse sociocultural fabric. So the next, please. Great. So the whole book chapter is anchored in key questions. The first one was, how do TESOL textbooks in Moroccan high school portray culture and interculturality? The second one was about how can critical pedagogy reshape interculturality in these textbooks to challenge inequities or injustices. And the third one is, how can TESOL textbooks address immigrant influx in Morocco to promote cultural equity and inclusivity. So if you, just to know that Morocco used to be a transit country for immigrants, but now it's a destination for settlement rather than just transit country. That's why we have to think of new approaches on how to integrate, not only economically, to integrate migrants, not only economically, but how to integrate them also in the cultural tissue of in the Moroccan context. The next, please. So we have opted for 7 subsections in this chapter. Interculturality in Moroccan academia. As you know, that the mixture of interculturality and critical pedagogy is under research in the Moroccan context, with few research papers that's written on the issue. The next one is empowering education through critical pedagogy, because we believe that education is hardly ever used for empowerment in the Moroccan context. The third one is dynamics of interculturality, bridging identities and cultures, interculturality and migration. We try to rethink language learning in Morocco. And the next one is beyond the painting canvas in living for TESOL with cultural murals and the maintenance of dominant cultural narratives. The last one is the promotion of multiple perspectives, trying to amplify or to make the voice of immigrants heard in the EFL text, Moroccan textbooks. The next one, please. And of course, we opted for some theoretical insights from different literature. For example, in Morocco, as you know, that textbooks serve as a valuable resource for fulfilling this need without physically transporting students to a native speakers country. So the only reference that students have to open up to other cultures is the textbook. Unfortunately, textbook designers are not aware of the many biases, etc., that are incorporated in these textbooks. So to uncritically prioritize Anglophone narratives risks sidelining local epistemologies. So this West-epicentric or the Eurocentric culture still dominates, for example, the design of the Moroccan textbooks. We believe that critical interculturality is framed as challenging static identities, power asymmetries, and systemic discrimination. So this aligns, of course, with critical pedagogy, which tries to rethink education not as a transformative force that links classroom practices to broader sociopolitical equity. And here I come back to what Professor Hamza says, that publishing is not an end in itself. So this aligns with the ultimate goal of critical pedagogy, which tries to transform not only publishing for the sake of publishing, but instead of helping students to read the word, critical pedagogy helps them, as Rory says, to read the world as a whole. The next one, please. So, because Freire's concept of epistemological curiosity, this is a key concept which I underlined in the book chapter, because it highlights the importance of questioning in curriculum design And this is what unfortunately curriculum designers in Morocco do not take into consideration, is to cultivate this epistemological curiosity in students. So emphasizing the difference between our and these binaries, if through the analysis of the textbooks, these binaries exist throughout the textbooks, which hinders the true intercultural understanding. And focusing on equity, power distribution, and basic language if proficiency in multiculturalism fosters contact zone where cultural exchanges occur. Southern languages, cultures, and ways of thinking are often seen as inferior or exotic adjunct to mainstream intercultural theories. The next one, please. So after the analysis of the textbooks, in which I opted for critical content analysis, we came to the findings. Number one, silencing historical injustices. As you know, the colonial roots of the French period of power asymmetries shape intercultural consciousness in the Moroccan context. Throughout the analysis, we found that there are always some binary constructs like inferior, superior as versus dominant privilege versus subordination, valued versus devalued, which means the result is an African knowledge that remains peripheral. So there is also epistemic narrowing, a Western-centric gaze which dominates the textbooks. And probably if you come back to the book chapter, and we'll find so many examples about this. Marginalization of non-Western worldviews limits genuine intercultural dialogue for students. The normalization of hegemony, because there is a systemic inequity that remains unchallenged. And here in the chapter, we opted not only for the concept of hegemony but also the concept of power, because according to Gramsci, that hegemony is a bottom-up process but power is a top-down process, because when we accept to be inferior, of course, it's the problem in the reader or in the student or in the teachers, for example, who cannot, for example, change the frames of reference of students who cannot or who fail to empower students to question such systemic inequalities that remain a challenge in DFL textbooks. The result is that textbooks reinforce evil ideological conformity instead of fostering that critical engagement. So the result is pedagogical stagnation, and which leads to indoctrination and rote learning that prevails, unfortunately, in DFL textbooks. So the next one, please. So still in the findings, there is a kind of absence of reflexivity, or we can say that the absence of epistemic curiosity. So no power conscious inquiries. So as you know, that in critical pedagogy, the focus is not only in critical thinking, but on critical consciousness. Because students are supposed to change the world through what they learn in class. So learners lack the tools to deconstruct cultural hierarchies and resist epistemic oppression. So this empowerment in cultural negotiation, without critical engagement, learners remain trapped in imposed ideological constructs, ideological, for example, that are imposed by top-down narratives. As you know, that in Moroccan context, we cannot separate, for example, the curriculum design from what is political. So we cannot depoliticize education in the Moroccan context, and DFL textbooks are no exception, of course. Superficial inclusivity and epistemic exclusion. So most perspectives of students or the student's voice is absent, and also that of teachers, because even the whole knowledge being embedded in EFL textbooks are commodified or used. Teachers are used just as machines to transmit the content rather than inquiring and trying to dismantle these power dynamics that prevail in the textbooks. When we talk about immigrants' voice, it's silenced which hinders equitable intercultural dialogue, of course, and they cannot find themselves, or their identity is not present in the EFL textbooks. The last finding is that insufficient empowerment, which means that critical pedagogy is hardly ever being incorporated, or there is a quasi-absence of the incorporation of critical pedagogy in the curriculum design, especially EFL textbooks. So the transformative engagement is still unaccomplished. So, which means that EFL textbooks cannot change students' frames of reference, of course. The next one, and I think it's the last one. So the result, after analyzing or critical analyzing the textbooks, the chapter critics Moroccan EFL textbooks misalignment or mismatch with critical pedagogy, which advocated for redesigned materials. The materials should be redesigned and teachers training to critically examine or scrutinize the power dynamics such as privilege, marginalization, and inferior, as we said before, inferior, etc., and try to integrate social justice themes. So it positions language education as a means to cultivate or nurture equity-oriented global citizenship through transformative dialogue. And thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abdelhadi. Lana and Christine.
Greetings, everyone. We had a very enjoyable time drafting this chapter, which was entitled Unlocking the Power of Intercultural Awareness and Competence with Experiential Activities for Tertiary Level Students in the Gulf. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Here you can see an outline of our chapter, which started in the usual way with an introduction. We won't spend a lot of time on that. We set the topic in context by talking about the importance. We situated our chapter in 3 theories of culture, and we provided an overview of those 3 theories as well as a critical review. And they were worldview theory, Hofstede's cultural dimensions, and the Knowledge Works 12 Dimensions of Culture framework. Then we turned to some recommended practices that we feel are really important for teaching culture and cultural aspects to our students. I think the part of the chapter that we had the most fun with were the actual experiential activities that we're going to describe a few of here in this short time we have together. So let's move ahead. The importance of intercultural competence, we use kind of like some statistics, some diagrams like you see here. Anyone who's been in the Gulf, you know that there are a variety of different cultures that are represented in education and in the country. So we use some of those global statistics to set everything in context. Next, please. Some of the recommendations that we provided were to focus on things in our classrooms like cultural universals, those aspects of culture that are the same in all cultures, but yet they might manifest themselves as being different. Those 10 basic elements of every culture was another example that we put forward. And our focus, of course, was on open dialogue, communication, and reflection. Next, please. The activity part of our chapter was basically structured in the following way. We provided a description of the activities. I think there are 6 in total, plus some activities that can be used beyond the classroom. We provided a description, why we thought it was important, its purpose. We gave a step-by-step process on how to integrate the activity into the classroom. We gave recommendations as well as to when we felt the activity might be best situated or best placed within the semester or the academic year, and offered finally some extension activities and perhaps resources that might be used to extend that activity. Now, the activities we had, next please, are on this next slide. And of course, with the time we have with you this evening, we're only going to be describing 2 of those activities out of the 6 that we drafted in the chapter, and talking about a little bit about those activities that we feel could extend beyond the classroom for best intercultural awareness and competence. So I'm going to hand over to Lana, who's going to describe 2 of our 6 activities as well as our beyond the classroom activities. Lana, over to you.
Thank you, Christine. Next, please. So some of the activity, this is how we basically formatted in the chapter, the activities we describe. We try to make it a practical chapter for teachers to not only look at theories, but we also revisited the theories and looked at it from our contextual lens and what applies to us, and really had the critical review. And then we looked at these practical activity. I don't know. Okay, it says I'm getting a message about the transcription. Okay. So one of the activities that we talked about is a culture shock, and that's one of the basic activities that we used to do in the past, so with our students, and wanted to revisit that and see how applicable could it be still today. So basically, we describe how the different culture shocks that students go through in experiencing different situations, how they would go through the shocks, and how they would deal with it in today. Can you next, please? We still look at, there's an image here, but we still look at, does it show? If you click on it, click next. Yeah, there you go. So if we also looked at this typical graph of the stages of culture shock and how would it apply in today's situations. And we would get students to go through the different stages, and it depends on whatever situation they are describing. And we notice that it is still applicable in today's basically world. Next. The second activity, and that would be at the beginning of the class. The next activity that we describe is something that we usually do in the middle of the semester, where students bring a cultural artifact and in a bag and try to describe it. So we look at that also how it could be done online using different online tools, and we discuss and propose the different tools and how this could be also applicable for nowadays. Next. At the end of the semester, we looked at how could we teach also different cultural concepts, and those concepts were basically brought together through an experiential trip that students can go through, and one which we described based on our interdisciplinary research, a seminar at sea, where basically students actually experience a new way of traveling and exploration of culture in a cruise trip. The other activity that we describe and go into details is about a home-based activity where students do a desert barbecue or go through a desert safari, and they experience their own culture through the lens of others, teachers, and so on. Next. So the way forward is basically trying to look how technology has impacted globalization and the cultural dynamics, how we can, as teachers, embrace the different innovative approaches, and also looking back at what worked in the past in teaching. We found that social media also has offered very rich platforms for intercultural ideas and exchange of cultures. And that's it for our chapter in this brief presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much. Melanie and Sarah?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our summary of Chapter 6 of the book that you see on the screen. The chapter is called Reconceptualizing Intercultural Communication, Research for the MENA, a rereading of the social construction of reality. And my name is Melanie Vandenhoven, and I am presenting from the French Alps. And
my name is Sarah Hopkins, and I'm presenting from England. But we should note that both Melanie and I have had many years living and working in the Gulf, specifically in Abu Dhabi, for over 25 years combined. And so in this presentation, we want to combine, we want to do a rereading of this book that you can see on the screen with reference to the local context. And specifically, we'll highlight two conceptual problems for researchers in the field. And then we'll briefly introduce the theoretical framework. And finally, we'll offer 4 takeaways for you.
next. So as researchers based in Abu Dhabi for over a decade each, we've examined the dynamics of communicating in a lingua franca, such as English. We argue that this question of lingua franca communication is a special question for intercultural research. And our chapter begins with 2 conceptual problems for researchers. The first problem may be common to many of you, is how can we position our research findings within existing epistemological paradigms and then make theoretically sound claims? And the second one is, how can we deal with gaps in the theories themselves, such as when good theories developed in one center at an earlier time does not readily fit the current context under investigation? So our chapter was a response to these problems, and our rereading of the social construction of reality led us to establish several working principles for researching interculturality and intercultural education. Now, intercultural communication research can be defined as an investigation into perspectives and practices of the ways people associated with different cultural groups interact. And the field has broad appeal to many. However, as Zuha warns, intercultural communication research is an umbrella term, and it's not good enough to cite established or ready-made definitions. As intercultural communication researchers, we must clarify for ourselves how we define interculturality and intercultural realities. So to do so entails defining reality, knowledge, language, socialization, or learning, since these constructs really direct the research process. So in our chapter, we examine these theoretical aspects using our own research studies. Next.
We find that Abu Dhabi is one compelling site amongst many in the region where English is used for learning and for working. And encounters between citizens and others are structured within a guest-host or mentor-mentee relationship. And for examining the relationship between people and language choices and objects in various spaces, it was possible to generate theoretical insights about the intercultural reality. We argue that Abu Dhabi is a place where intercultural reality is constructed and language plays a special role. In the chapter, we discuss intersectionality, intercultural relations, and lingua franca communication, and we treat Abu Dhabi as our center and our center of theorizing. So we refer to our research publications, and many of these you can see on the screen here. And we use our own personal trajectories to illustrate certain theoretical ideas, including our knowledge construction process. For instance, we report on moving beyond the English-Arabic binary, or the English-Arabic dichotomy, and the importance of highlighting language practices of multilingual residents. We also argue that intercultural experiences, including the special conditions of multilingualism in the MENA region, provide ripe conditions for theory building. Next.
Now, The Social Construction of Reality, the book you see here, was published by Peter Berger and Thomas Luckman in 1971. So it's a theory of reality, which is said to be at once realist and relativist. It's also a sociological framework in which the lived experiences, lived experience can be discussed with the certainty that phenomena are real and that they possess certain characteristics. When it was first published, this theoretical framework had disrupted existing claims about knowledge as consciousness and objective truth by stating that knowledge is developed socially through learning from each other from childhood all the way through adulthood. So knowledge is built through communicating with others. And then this view of knowledge as socially constructed is now widely accepted in qualitative research in English language education and many other fields. And a special note to that constructivism is often associated with constructionism, but it highlights internal and cognitive processes of learning rather than the social dynamic. Okay, next. So through rereading this text, we extracted three key principles which we think are important for the field. The first is knowledge develops dynamically via lifelong social and communicative practices. Second is intercultural learning is a distinct type of socialization which happens through interaction with people from other cultural or linguistic backgrounds. And three, we also describe a dialectical view of power where power constrains individuals, but within institutional structures, but also gives agencies to individuals to make changes. Okay, now let's move to the next slide. Okay, so now the takeaways. So first of all, we explain the key terms used in the theoretical framework, and we use practical illustrations of what this means for research. So we discuss the 4 levels of knowledge: pre-theoretical knowledge theories, symbolic universes, and interpretive schemes. We also describe 2 kinds of socialization, primary and secondary, and explain how this has led to the third kind in the field, which is called tertiary socialization, and it really represents an important development in our field. Next. Okay. Another takeaway to highlight is that it is this tertiary socialization and the special role of intercultural mediators that gives rise to, I think, a lot of interesting theoretical development in our field. Thirdly, we highlight that communicating in a shared language is a theoretical problem for the field, often because a common language is assumed, but contexts like Abu Dhabi pose new ways of understanding lingua franca communication in which a shared home language cannot be assumed. And with this summary, we conclude that the MENA region is a very important context for future intercultural research. This context is underrepresented, as Hamza outlined, but bears enormous potential for researching intercultural mediators, lingua franca communication, and other ways of intercultural mediation. Next.
So thank you very much. We will end there. But just to say that every region is different and deserves a different lens or should be treated as its own center, I think is one of the key takeaways we'd like to leave you with. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for your extensive research and sharing that with all of us here. We do have some time for maybe a couple of questions. I've been monitoring the chat. Let me see, there's